You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where I am the voice of most of society. When I say my name's Evan Burke, that's just me. That's not society. That's my name. But the way in which I represent society is through my dislike of wrestling. But I also am fascinated by it and have three close friends who have dedicated their lives in many ways to wrestling, both as fans and as practitioners of the art form, and they are here to help me on a journey in which I will try to understand why anybody would carve out time in their day to watch people kind of pretend to fight and kind of for real fight in a ring in front of a bunch of people. Sometimes in a dirty basement with barbed wire everywhere.
As we'll soon learn on today's episode. I am Katie Vella, by the way, professional referee, also streamer. Follow me on Twitch at Over Here Counting. Plug. I have been watching wrestling since 2003, and suddenly I wonder what I've done with my life.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been involved in wrestling for about 11 years now. As a wrestler, commentator, ring announcer, etc. I think it's interesting your use of the word carved in there, Evan. We've definitely watched some carvings lately, and this week is no exception.
Rivulets.
Getting a little tired of all the blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College and scholar of professional wrestling. I am very happy for myself and Doc and Katie to be Virgil to Evan's Dante. Not Virgil the wrestler, but Virgil as in author of the Aeneid and character in Dante's Inferno who leads Dante on a tour of hell. And this is a particularly apt comparison for today's episode when we discuss Hell in a Cell and some other kinds of wrestling hell that we watched.
Of which there are many.
Indeed.
So this is ostensibly part of our Mick Foley series, although we're covering some matches where Foley is less of a presence.
Yeah, we're only doing one Foley match today, so the centerpiece of today's episode is the much heralded Hell in a Cell match between Mankind and The Undertaker at King of the Ring 1998. It's one of the most famous wrestling matches in history. The moment, one of the key moments when Mankind gets thrown off of the cell is, I'd say, in the top 2 or 3 moments, most famous and talked about moments in wrestling history. So that's the main point of the episode, is to talk about that match. But along with it, I thought it was also important to talk about the very first Hell in a Cell match from In Your House Bad Blood 1997 between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, which is an interesting match in and of itself, as well as the barbed wire, no ropes, barbed wire ECW World Heavyweight title match between Sabu and Terry Funk from ECW Born to be Wired 1997. Which I think also is an important match to talk about in the context of Hell in a Cell, because around the time of these two matches, the Foley Hell in a Cell match and the barbed wire match, this is really where the violence of hardcore wrestling, at least on a major level, was at its height, when it came to its peak in these two matches. I remember in 2001, so I had been watching a little bit of wrestling, but I had missed a lot, and I hadn't really been watching consistently since the end of 97. And sometime in 2001, I was at my friend Arthur's place in the West Village. He goes by Art now, a friend of mine since junior high school. We had gone to wrestling shows together. We went to Survivor Series 96 together. And he had been watching pretty consistently when I wasn't. And I was like, hey, Arthur, are there some matches that I should see that I haven't seen over these years? And he showed me 3 matches. Hell in a Cell between Mankind and The Undertaker from King of the Ring 98, Sabu and Terry Funk, the barbed wire match, and the second TLC match, which I think we'll talk about in a future episode. But 3 insane hardcore spectacles. And I was like, oh, this is what wrestling is now? Fuck, that's fucking crazy. And it probably should have turned me off to it from then on, but it did not.
I feel like if there was ever an episode that was going to scar Evan mentally for the rest of his days, it would be this one. And judging by the visage I see in front of me now through our Zoom meeting, it appears that this traumatized Evan so hard that several parts of his beard just fell right off.
In an indirect way, I guess it is sort of responsible for it, because I watched these matches and then I was like, man, I'm not going to be able to quit smoking weed right now, so I'm going to have to shave my beard so I can put a mask on and go out and meet my weed guy. That's the actual story behind this.
It's not that you're anticipating having a barbed wire match and don't want to get your beard caught in the barbed wire, because that could happen.
I do often, I will say one thing that I have to be careful of when I'm wearing a long beard is that if it gets too long, it sort of passes outside of my sphere of bodily awareness, and then I'm really afraid I'm going to get it caught on something and it's going to rip my
You're
face
just
off.
whipping women in the face in public with your beard.
It just sets on fire, and you can't tell for way too long.
Yeah, I have lit it on fire in the past.
Doc speaks like someone that knows.
Yes.
These matches, it's not like it was scarring per se. I kind of felt like I felt a lot of things. I felt towards these matches, I guess, some of the things that I have been feeling towards Mick Foley, which is that a a respect for the fact that it had to go here eventually. Somebody had to do this. Eventually, somebody had to take it this far. You've talked before about how there's sort of throughout the history of professional wrestling, there's sort of this rise and fall of what people expect and how risky and violent everything gets, and then it inevitably reaches a point where it's too much and everybody has to kind of scale back. And this, this time, the late 90s, feels like very much, it must have hit a particular roof and came back. Foley falling off the cage, stuff like that, sets this new bar where you can't really ask your guys to do it on the regular. Wrestlers, however crazy wrestlers might be and however self-destructive and everything, most guys aren't going to want to do that. And you shouldn't really expect them to have to. But that's always what happens when a new bar gets set. A new bar gets set, and then people are super into it, and then the boss is like, well, this is how we're making money now, and inevitably there's a pressure to do more and more crazy shit.
No, so I think some of the traditionalists will say this ruined wrestling forever. They could never really quite put the genie back in the bottle after this. And for new generations of fans, I think they were able to kind of scale things down and re-educate the audience to want something different. But for the moment, I think you're right. They hit this ceiling, or fell off the literal ceiling. And from that point on, and we're going to, for the premium episode, we're going to show some attempts to sort of go further than this, or where hardcore has gone since then. And it's not pretty,
Are we going to watch some Combat Zone wrestling?
Yeah,
right.
Before. Exactly. And where, and to the point where it's really not enjoyable, except for a very small minority of fans. Now, at the time, specifically when the Foley thing happened, when he went off the cell, 2 things to say about that, and we'll get into the details a little bit more as we go on. But one thing is, when it happened, it accomplished. Some people think that it ended the Monday Night War, that moment ended the feud between WWF and WCW, because once that happened, there was nothing more to compete over. WCW couldn't possibly do anything more shocking or more spectacular than that. And WWF sort of demonstrated, this is the bar that we're willing to hit, and no one is going to be able to top it. So forget about it. It's over. So that's one thing. And on that note, when it happened, the story is that Vince McMahon went up to Foley and was like, "That, thank you for doing that. Please don't ever do anything like that ever again."
I think the fault in the reasoning that this was like the end of the Monday Night War is that that's predicated on the fact that the company that's willing to do the craziest thing is going to win. If that was the case, then like ECW would have been a much bigger deal than it was. This match was, it was a confluence of several things. Mankind was really hot months before this, but he wasn't that hot at the moment. You could say kind of the same thing about The Undertaker, although the reaction of the crowd when The Undertaker comes out is still just astronomical. But Foley, wanted to really leave an impression. So he was like, well, let's just start the match on top of the cage. Like, that was his idea. And then it just kind of went from there. The thing that gets me about this match is how he does keep getting up and like as though he's fine when he's clearly not fine. He's not fine at all. And then more stuff happens, and then he's less fine, but he's still just like adrenaline or who knows. It really reignited the fire for the fans.
And this is
for him.
indicative of Foley's career where, he was afraid that he was becoming irrelevant. And so what does he have to do in order to become relevant again, in order to get the crowd interested again? He has to fucking almost kill himself.
He has to almost die.
And the fact that he was thinking that way is just, it's wild. Like, here's a guy on national television every week, an extremely popular wrestler who's like, oh no, I need to keep pushing this. I need to keep pushing this envelope or else no one's going to care about me anymore. And that's really sad.
Well, because I kept thinking about how it must be strange as a wrestler to if somebody asks you to do something that you are not comfortable doing, where you are afraid of risking yourself and your body, that's easy to understand, being like, no, of course I'm not going to do that. But it must be really strange when somebody like the conversation Mick Foley has with The Undertaker back there. Like, I wonder if there was any pushback from The Undertaker of like, dude, like, I don't want to, like, the 50-50 chance you die doing this. Like, I don't feel comfortable. And Foley's like, no, I want you to do this. This has to be the way. And I'm picturing like that, where somebody else is like, oh, no, I'm comfortable taking on this risk and all of this. And the other person being like, yeah, but I still am going to feel like I killed you if you die. So I don't want to do it.
You look at Undertaker on the top of the cell after he throws Mankind off, and he looks like he's worried that he might be dead.
He's probably worried that he might be dead.
Foley said that he asked Taker later what he thought after he chokeslammed him through the roof. And he said Taker just said to him, I thought you were dead.
So, yeah, let's talk a little bit.
The crowd, by the way, when they're stretchering Foley out the first time, is chanting Undertaker. And like, that's a big
that
difference.
was so badass that he did that.
Right. That wouldn't happen today. Today, the whole focus would be on our fallen friend and warrior. Back then, it was still like, well, we're going to see The Undertaker and Mankind fight. And The Undertaker beat up Mankind. Yay. He really did a number on him.
Because I guess us, looking at it like analytical nerds, of course, we recognize that Foley's the one who did the really impressive shit. But yeah, within kayfabe, that was The Undertaker getting as over as possible, where it's like, look at how powerful I am. I am the only wrestler. Right. I'm an undead wizard who will throw you 25 feet onto the ground. Like,
so let me just, for the sake of listeners who haven't seen the match or heard people talk about it, this is what happens. So,
all right.
For those who have been living under a rock for 25 years.
So Foley comes to the ring. He immediately climbs on top of the cage, which apparently in his book he said was way harder than he expected.
Like, if you look at the cages these days, when they do when these kinds of stunts like they do in this match are a lot like, they're safer and they're more like stuntman, you'll see that there are holes in the cage for hands and feet to go in, to climb up. This was just Foley pulling his 300 pounds up by his fingers. It's a lot easier when you're a little kid climbing on fences, not so much when you're Mick Foley in 97.
So they're all numb and mangled by the time he gets up there. Also, we need to describe the Hell in a Cell. So the Hell in a Cell is a steel cage that, unlike most steel cages in wrestling, has a roof on top, and it extends out past the ring. So there's an outside the ring perimeter that you can run around in and fight in between the cage and the ring. And so, cage matches traditionally, they always, like, the joke is kind of the cage match is always booked to keep out outside interference so that the wrestlers just fight each other. But almost inevitably someone gets in the cage or they get out.
Pretty much every time.
Pretty much every time.
Especially
there
the
is
Hell
some
in a Cell
interference.
matches.
Especially the Hell in a Cell. So we get the first Hell in a Cell match between Shawn Michaels and Undertaker. And, immediately, so that was really clever where, like, Shawn Michaels, like he commonly does, takes out a cameraman by flipping on top of him. And they have to open the cage to let the cameraman out. And while it's open, Undertaker and Shawn spill to the
Really?
outside.
That cameraman
Yeah, man,
violence
he
was
really
ridiculous.
beats the shit out of that cameraman. Did that cameraman go on to be a wrestler?
I was trying to figure that out too. Like, they don't show his face.
He's probably a
So
wrestler.
I'm wondering who it was. It was probably a local guy or somebody's buddy. It was probably very likely a trained wrestler.
Yeah, like you could tell he was built and he was like bumping for Sean's working punches and everything. It wasn't like he bumped into him and he fell over. Like Sean stopped beating him up, went into the ring, and then left the ring again to keep beating him up.
That was really the moment where I was like, "Wow, Sean! Wow, Sean!" This match felt a lot like a. Sometimes we watch a match. Like I thought this when we watched Hogan Warrior, kind of, and I get the feeling that this is sort of a platonic ideal of a certain kind of wrestling match.
Wait, you mean Sean Taker?
Yes,
Or Paul Taker?
Sean Taker, and also just in that it's the kind of story that it tells, like the same way there's X number of stories. All books are telling one of 12 stories or whatever, something like that. The way that there's a sort of like basic archetypical wrestling matches. And this seems like a real, I don't know, the Authority punishing the upstart for brazenness, I suppose.
I can see that to some degree, though. So yeah, it's interesting that like Sean is kind of turning heel at this point. This is a month before the Montreal Screwjob. So we're leading into that. We're leading into Sean being the big heel in the company to fight Austin. But they also had to kind of settle this thing between Undertaker and Sean. Because at SummerSlam, Sean costs Undertaker the title being the referee in the match with Undertaker and Bret Hart. And he accidentally hits Undertaker with the chair, and then he counts 3, and that's a whole story in and of itself. And then the other thing that they were doing with this match was introducing Kane. So they were able to sort of settle the thing between Shawn and Undertaker, get Shawn over Undertaker so that he's the guy in line for the title, and make him the big heel. So people are pissed that he wins this match over the Undertaker. Right. While also moving Undertaker on to his next program, which is going to be with Kane, who makes his debut.
That's got to be Kane.
It's got to be Kane. They had been talking about, Paul Bearer had been talking about Undertaker's brother Kane for weeks, and this was his debut. Right. He shows up, he rips the door off the cage, and tombstones the Undertaker and costs him the match.
There are only like 11 or 12 stories, and this is the one where one of our protagonists, thought to be dead brother in what may have been an arson that you may or may not have committed that killed your parents at the funeral home, comes back to life to beat you up. It's a classic.
Oh, that one.
That one.
Which one of Shakespeare's plays was that?
Oh,
that was The Tempest 2.
Midsummer, I think.
Yeah.
King Lear.
So,
Yes.
Oh,
Paul Bearer played King Lear.
So the Undertaker has an established canonical biography?
Well, Kane actually has an established canonical novelization of his life that Ben attempted to read once and couldn't because the prose was so awful.
It was too bad.
And it just doesn't make any sense, does it? It's like trying to piece together the various... Look, all I'll say is we still need to do both an Undertaker and a Kane episode. Yeah, that's all.
Kane, the story behind Kane is one of those soap opera stories where it changes from year to year as it goes on, but
eventually there's a corpse fucking.
Yes, eventually there is a corpse fucking.
I mean, the main retcon was that, Kane shows up wearing a mask because he apparently was burned horribly in this fire that turned out to be Undertaker's fault that killed their parents.
Maybe.
But then, of course, they wanted to take off the mask eventually. So he had to be not terribly burned. They had to be psychological scars.
And it turns out he could talk also.
Right. For a little while, they had him talking with one of those voice boxes that people use who have had tracheotomies.
And then they stopped. They just had
They
him
stopped
talk.
that.
And now he's the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. So that's
the actual mayor of Knox County,
Wow.
Tennessee, Glenn Jacobs.
How has he been doing a decent job as far as anyone knows?
I don't know. I mean, he's like a libertarian that runs under the Republican Party. It's a popular philosophy around there. The best I can say about him with those philosophies that I don't really agree with is that they asked him, well, do you ever want to run for president? And he just said, look, what works for Knox County won't necessarily work for the country. I'm fine right here. And I'm like, that's reasonable if the people around there like it, I think.
Apparently him and Daniel Bryan have had some really interesting political discussions.
Oh, yeah.
They're polar opposites, but are really good friends and have worked together for a long time. So I'd love to hear what those conversations were like.
Oh yeah, to sit in the back seat of that car for 8 or 9 hours between towns would probably be very interesting.
Shawn Michaels he goes up to after they spill out of the cage, he runs up to the top. Undertaker follows him. Shawn takes a bump off of the middle of the cage, right? Hanging off of the wall through the table. And I love the call there from JR is he may just be broken in half.
Yes.
Then we get to the Mankind Undertaker Hell in a Cell match where Mankind, so he climbs right up on the cage at the beginning of the match. Undertaker follows him up there and then throws Mankind off of the top through the table in this spectacular, insane stunt. And JR's call is, by God is my witness, he's broken in half. So...
JR was at his finest in that whole Mankind Undertaker Hell in a Cell. That was peak JR.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely was. His quotes from that match were the ones that he said that people will run up to him on the street and just shout them at him. They're his catchphrases, which must be a little disconcerting. You're 60-year-old, droopy old JR, and somebody runs up to you as God is my witness, he's broken in half. It's Yes, I'll sign your autograph. Please leave me alone.
I couldn't catch if it was JR or Lawler who said it, but at one point one of the commentators during this match says, "Uh-oh, this is scary."
I think that was definitely Lawler.
Yeah.
I think I remember hearing him say that and being fucking great perspective, Lawler. That was poetic.
So,
oh, man.
Evan, to your earlier point, I don't think the Shawn Taker match is so much them punishing, the authority punishing Shawn for his transgressions, but rather the crowd, right? He was going to get his comeuppance for being a bastard to the Undertaker, the crowd and the Undertaker as the sort of representation of them. And this Shawn Taker match is one of the more violent matches in WWF history to that point. And so Mankind and Taker felt like they needed to top it, right? Hell in a Cell 2 had to be bigger than Hell in a Cell 1. And they certainly did escalate.
No, Undertaker, he's got to be one of the most over people ever, right? Just every time the Undertaker shows up, the whole audience is going to be firmly behind him the whole time, right? That's
Totally. Over the course of time, he's definitely on the list of top most popular wrestlers of all time.
Oh, Undertaker himself is his own multi-part series.
Yeah, and in almost any match you'll see with him, like you just said, the crowd will lose their minds. And they've not only because he's so great, but they've done such a great job of priming the crowd with the lights going out and the gong. People have described it as the Undertaker has the greatest entrance in wrestling. Yes. And over the years, he always tweaked it a little, add some dry ice, add a vulture or something. Occasionally raise your arms and have lightning hit, in the arena.
So he is technically a face despite also being an evil wizard.
Yeah.
It depends. I mean, he's been heel before. Everyone still cheered him.
When he's a face, he's not an evil wizard. He's one of these, like, Galactus type guys. He's a force of nature.
Right.
He is death.
Right, yeah.
Right, he is death.
When death comes for you, it can be justified and the right time for you to go,
sure.
Or it can be too soon and awful and tragic, right? So
everybody's got to face the Undertaker.
Yeah, most of the time he's a face, though, just because he's so fucking cool.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Like, it's hard.
He's so cool.
It's hard to come up with someone that the crowd will cheer over him.
When he debuted, he was a heel. And he wrestled really heavily into like the zombie style. He wouldn't move a lot. He had like completely no-sell everything, which was new to the WWF at the time. It was weird. And over his first 2 years of his career, he got way over as a heel, but he became a cult figure. People would start showing up to the arenas dressed as the Undertaker, and they were savvy enough to see which way the wind was blowing, so they just turned him face. And it's like, oh, well, how can you have a character like this be a babyface? But no, if the crowd starts cheering with him, he's already a babyface. You should just go with it, which is something they don't do enough today.
Before we dive into the Mankind Undertaker match, assessment of the HBK Undertaker, Evan, what did you think of the match?
Oh, I thought it was a good match. I got kind of bored after a while. I feel like I don't. I liked it at first. And it didn't get bad or anything, but it did kind of lose me until he started beating up the cameraman. That got me back in a little bit.
That was so amusing. It was just so pointlessly mean, and it just kept going.
Oh no, it is interesting to think about now. Like, I feel like I've learned enough about wrestling where there are times when I like the match at first, and then I get bored. It's sort of, there's a window of time where I'm like, okay, well, am I bored on purpose now? Like, is the match actively boring me because something interesting is about to happen? Which then is very satisfying.
It's the ebb before the flow.
And that's very satisfying when it comes through. But then if the match ends and I'm bored, it's even more upsetting.
Now, it might also, the boring parts are also an invitation for you as a fan to start to contribute, right? So, like,
just throw money at them.
Right. When the face is taking heat, that's when if you're there live, you got to start making noise and cheering to get the face back into the match, right? So that's also part of it. Is often those times that's time for you to take your solo. Bass player,
Nobody cheers for that.
No.
Yeah, Jim Ross used to say that like the wrestlers played the music and the commentators gave the lyrics, and the crowd was definitely part of the music, because he has to react based on the crowd also. One of the problems with all this empty arena stuff is that the commentators have to be excited, and they're the only ones excited.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to be excited when 20,000 people are excited with you.
Yeah, totally. There's a couple of things I like about this match. I like how, Undertaker completely dominates from the beginning. And it's the way that Shawn is able to take advantage is kind of cool, where Undertaker throws Shawn into the cage, and then like Shawn just kind of bounces off of it.
Yeah.
And Taker doesn't expect him to bounce back so quickly. So Taker's already charging in and hits the cage. So Shawn is able to take advantage through none of his own doing, just because Undertaker threw him at the cage too hard. So I thought that was a cool little detail.
I like how they went through, because this was the first Hell in a Cell match before every Hell in a Cell match had outside interference. I like how they went through all of the act of getting like Commissioner Sergeant Slaughter coming out, instructing the ref, no, we have to open the cage door to get the cameraman out. I have the authority to do that. And then they carefully do all that. And then, of course, immediately the Undertaker and Shawn blow out the door. But a second part to that that I thought was great is that when Kane finally comes out, without any of that lock and key stuff, he just grabs the door and rips it off the cage. Which, like, it immediately established the Kane character as a supernatural force like The Undertaker.
Weird that I think Kane has had Hell in a Cell matches since then.
Yeah.
And was not so capable of just ripping the door off its hinges.
No, Kane is inconsistent, if nothing else.
They've reinforced it
I would
since
imagine
then.
that Kane,
I also-
like The Undertaker, is a character who they have to nerf occasionally because he'll get too powerful, and then they're like, uh-oh, nobody can convincingly beat him.
But like Shawn wins, through no fault of his own the entire
No.
match, right? And he's completely destroyed from that table fall.
Well,
and it's only Kane's interference that allows him to win.
To that point, when they run out of the cage, when Shawn runs out of the cage the first time, the spot is he does the full wind-up, nails the full super kick, and Taker doesn't even wait. He immediately just sits up like, fuck your super kick, I'm The Undertaker, and Shawn runs.
That was amazing. I love that.
That was incredible. Which
the
makes
whole
it
Sweet Chin Music wind up.
Which
Tuned
makes
up
it-
the band all the way. Hit the Sweet Chin Music, and then Undertaker sat up immediately. I loved it.
and that made it so much more impactful when Kane hits the tombstone and that puts the Undertaker out. The debut of Kane is one of the most effective debuts they've ever had. Immediately puts somebody make them as powerful as you want them to be through very few
That's
inches.
gotta be Kane.
Right, that's gotta be Kane. And Paul Bearer looks great just standing behind him with his face and his hands. He's adds to every frame he's on screen.
I like how Kane, I guess, he had been in the WWF doing other characters for a while. He was Isaac Yankem, DDS. But when he picks him up for the tombstone, it takes him a while to figure out which camera he wants to face.
Yeah, he
And
shows
what direction.
He shows all four sides of the crowd and then does it at hard cam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, though the hard cam's not on him at the moment that he does it.
That's
But-
an editing problem.
Right,
Don't just gloss over Dr. Isaac Yankem, though. Tell Evan about Kane's the guy's ride of bad gimmicks before he became Kane.
I thought that was Kane's character. Is the
Yes, he was Isaac Yankem, DDS. He was a demented dentist.
all right then?
I Yankem.
When you were no, I got that. I just when
Ah.
the
But he had
context-
really bad
the
teeth.
context I got from the discussion you were having. I thought that was a character that Paul Bearer had played, which
Oh, no.
made a lot more
No,
sense
no.
actually. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. No.
No,
Kane
when
was
they-
Isaac Yankem.
when they
First,
hired
it-
the guy that played Kane, that was their first deal with him, and
When-
it didn't work.
When he was in the Southern Territories before that, he was Unabomb.
Like the Unabomber, the
Oh,
murderer.
yeah. I just watched the there was a Netflix documentary about the Unabomber, and I was like, oh, I wonder if this is going to be a thing where I'm going to watch it and get like a whole new perspective on the Unabomber, and not really.
Yeah.
It's kind of an asshole.
So once they wound down the Isaac Yankem gimmick, they still wanted to use Glenn Jacobs because he was good, but that was a stupid gimmick. So the next thing that they did with him was when Diesel and Razor Ramon left the WWF and went to WCW, the WWF sued Turner and WCW for the guys who played Razor and Diesel still doing
this.
Razor and Diesel mannerisms, even though they were using their real names. So they brought out two other guys named Diesel and Razor Ramon wearing the costumes, and Kane was the fake Diesel. And that got over about as well as you could expect also. Like
Remember
it's like
Diesel?
going to see a real band and then a tribute band comes out.
Well, yeah, and also if that real band was like a band that was not very like
Yeah.
if you were gonna go see Counting Crows, and then it was like, oh no,
Right.
it's gonna be the Greater Midwest's third most popular Counting Crows tribute act.
Long December.
Yes.
Long
Yeah.
December, right? And the fake Diesel and the fake Razor Ramon each failed for different reasons. Kane could do all of Diesel's moves because there were only a few of them. But the whole appeal of Diesel is that Kevin Nash himself has this charisma coming off of him. Not that he was such a great wrestler. Razor Ramon was a great wrestler, and the guy they got to replace him really looked like dollar store Razor Ramon that just couldn't do it.
Like literally dollar store Razor Ramon that you get off a shelf in the back of a dollar store, like, or in like a bucket in like a crate.
He had a big gut. Like,
Yeah.
he was like several inches shorter than the actual
Butter Knife
Razor.
Sanchez.
Yeah. Exactly. He looked a
Pretty
lot
much.
like Butter Knife
Butter
Sanchez.
Knife Sanchez.
As long as we're going completely non sequitur here, Scott Hall said he came up with the Razor Ramon name because, like, he had already had Razor because the gimmick was a takeoff on Scarface, and he said that when he was doing like the interview at Titan Towers, with Vince trying to figure out the details, he went to the bathroom to pee, and he happened to pee at a urinal next to Tito Santana. And he said to Tito Santana, "Look, Tito, I need like a Hispanic first name." And without thinking about it, Tito just looked up and went, "Ramon." And he's like, "I'm Razor Ramon." Yes, Razor Ramon. So he credits Tito Santana with giving him that.
I guess that makes it slightly less racist.
I guess. Tito was great.
What was that at the interview at the what towers?
Titan Towers, as in Titan Sports, the parent company of the WWF at the time. It's the nickname for their office building.
I just framing it as the interview at Titan Towers does make it sound a lot like it's the beat 'em up game that you have, the live action beat 'em up game. You have to fight your way through to the top in order to get an interview with the WWE. Like you have to defeat Vince at the end.
That is how it
And then-
works.
yeah, that's
though.
what I figured. Yeah.
So they have announced that Money in the Bank this year, that they're filming at their center, the Money in the Bank match, it isn't just going to be 8 guys in a ring trying to get a briefcase. They're going to start at the ground floor of Titan Towers, and they're going to have to fight their way to the ring on the roof and get the briefcase from there. I'm not making
This
this
is
up.
real?
This is
This
what
is
they're
real.
doing. They're going to film them.
Yes.
This is going to be the next big WWE movie. Look, I
Are
haven't
they going to
been
have
watching
monster trucks there
I
as
think
well?
we even have Evan interested.
Oh my God.
I love how
There's a precedent to the monster trucks.
Yes.
throughout the coronavirus crisis, a lot of my favorite podcasters and YouTubers have wound up doing episodes of like what's in my house.
Yeah.
it's 'cause I'm running out of ideas. What can I use my space for? And to me, that's like the WWE version of that. I'm just like, all right, like we got a building. That's what we
They're
can use.
contractually
So-
obligated to deliver
Look,
a
I
certain
have a
amount of
plumbus.
programming, or else they'll lose all of the money that they're making from their biggest
Oh,
revenue
yeah.
source.
No, more power
So-
to them. I mean, actually, no, they
they're-
should
they're
not have
doing
more
it.
power.
No, they should
But,
not
like,
be
yeah.
doing it. I mean, honestly, not only should they not be doing it, but the government should, in fact, step in and stop that kind of contract from being in effect. But none of that is happening. They're just running because they're essential business in Florida.
Well, that's
One
the thing.
employee has
let's-
made a complaint, but it has, I think, been dismissed.
Yeah. Oh, they tried to act like not only did the employee not make. They tried to say the whole thing was made up.
Yeah, who knows?
Also, that employee
Ugh.
is not only dead, but there can be none of their records can be found. And sometimes their loved ones will try to remember them, but just get like a weird headache and then a nosebleed.
Oh,
It's weird.
Their bones were not located.
yeah. Oh, that on
All
that.
right, so back to Hell in a Cell.
Helena, what? Right. Oh, so The Undertaker
Yes.
versus Shawn Michaels. It's a great match. Couple of cool spots. I remember seeing Shawn go through that table and thinking he was dead. And
He does a pile driver on the steps.
Oh yeah, it
Hadn't
looked
seen
real
that
good.
before at that point.
And
So
everybody
the-
involved ended up looking better than they were before the match, which is a feat.
Yeah, and I remember when Sean went off the side of the cell through the table. Like, they're on the top, and I'm like, oh shit, is someone gonna fall off of the cell? And he kind of did.
Kind of.
And I remember thinking, like, one of these days, someone's gonna go off the fucking top of that thing. And already in the Undertaker Shawn match, like, he's slamming Shawn on the top of the cell, and the commentators are pointing out that the girders are bending, and that like it really seems like the ceiling could collapse. So, they were aware of the possibility. Then when Mankind and Undertaker are up there, before Mankind even gets thrown off, their like feet are going through the mesh. And
Oh, that thing looks like it needed to be way better. What's the word I'm looking for
Reinforced?
here? Reinforced. Yes, that thing looks like it was not properly reinforced at all.
Is there like a special extra technique you should use if you're falling more than 20 feet?
Okay, so Mankind talks about this a lot in his book. And Foley said of the two big spots with him getting thrown off the cage and the one going through the roof of the cage, he actually says the one going through the roof was worse, and I'll get to that. As far as going off, he took what would essentially be a perfect flat back bump. The most of his body hit at once without any single point hitting anything. The thing he was most worried about was hitting the pointy monitors on the table, which he did not. So as much as you can take a perfect bump falling that far through a table that, sorry to break the illusion, but the table helps to break your fall more than anything else.
especially one that just collapses like that.
Exactly. It helped. He took that bump as perfectly as you could take it.
I always just figured that was because Vince was using non-union carpenters.
Maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It depends on the state they're in, Seriously, when you're running big arenas like that, a major concern is, well, what's the union situation in your state? Because if you have the option as a big business of running in a state that the labor is going to cost sometimes literally 3 or 4 times more, you might steer clear of it.
Doc, I was roommates with someone who actually worked like WrestleMania rigging one year, and he was union.
He was union.
He was with a union that was hired on for it. They got the contract that year.
Right. So
In the indies, it's just the guys, right? Or like the students.
yeah, it's
putting
the
everything
trainees
together for free. One thing about what you were saying about him going through the announce table and like trying not to hit the monitors and all that.
Yeah.
These early table spots, like we saw the one with Bret Hart and Diesel, the one with Mankind and Shawn Michaels, these early announce table spots in WWF, they wanted to make them look spontaneous and whatever. So they fall through with all of that junk on the table, and it makes it look that much more dangerous. Nowadays, before they do a table spot, they clean the whole thing off. They take the plastic shell off, they take the monitors off, and it's like, in kayfabe, I guess you can be like, well, they don't want to get fined for breaking a bunch of the equipment, right? It's not that they care about their opponent's welfare. They don't want to break a bunch of stuff. But then when they're in like a murderous rage and they do it, it's still a little bit silly.
It's a little silly.
But it's way safer that way, I suppose.
It is. Especially now that instead of the big bulky monitors, they have tablets.
Right. So Foley gets stretchered out.
Yeah, he does the full stretcher job. The crowd is chanting Undertaker.
Yeah, Terry Funk is there to help him, of all people, right? And so he gets up in the middle of the aisle and is like, screw this, I'm not being stretchered out. He didn't limp back with everybody like fucking Roman Reigns in that Royal Rumble. He throws himself off the stretcher as soon as he can move, gets back to the ring. And, the crowd would have been like JR and King are saying on commentary, like, we apologize if the match ends early. But the crowd was, totally happy with what happened because it was already insane.
Oh, when Foley got up, the crowd went nuts. They couldn't believe it.
Did he injure himself when that happened?
A lot.
Yeah, no, he's fucked up. He's totally fucked up. I don't know if anything's broken or if he's concussed already at this point.
He's pretty I thought he was concussed pretty much immediately.
I guess that was a really stupid question on my part.
I love how the three of us are all going on about his various injuries immediately.
He climbs back up on that goddamn fucking cell.
He climbs the cage faster than he did at the beginning of the match because it was all adrenaline and he doesn't know what the hell is going on. And the Undertaker, seeing him, just starts beating him up again because what else are you going to do? Run? So they fight for a little while and the Undertaker goes for the choke slam. Now, Mankind in his book says this is one of the only times he didn't jump really well and go up high for the choke slam. And he thinks that's good because when he went through the cage, he would have over-rotated and landed on his head. If you see, he drags one of his feet on the top of the cage.
They didn't expect for the cage to break.
I don't think so.
That's what he said in the book, I think.
But the cage sure broke, and he landed on that unforgiving mat without anything to break his fall with a sickening crack. And then the chair that he had thrown onto the roof of the cage a while back, he says his biggest regret in the match is just putting the chair down instead of getting rid of it, because the chair fell with him and hit him in the face, which is the same as him just laying on the mat and then the chair falling off the roof and hitting him in the face. Him also falling doesn't stop that.
Smashed
that
the fuck out of his face. You can see in the
It's
video
terrible.
one of his teeth coming out of his nose.
Like, and it's just the myriad of thoughts you have regarding how did it get exactly there?
Oh, I
Like,
didn't
what was
notice
the
that.
sequence of
Stay there.
events where his tooth ended up in his nose?
Oh my
Now,
god.
he turns to the camera once he comes to and tries, he says in the book, he smiles, and people are like, oh, he's smiling through all of it. What he's trying to do is show everybody him poking his tongue through the hole in his lip, which you can't see because of all of the beard and blood. So this is the match, by the way, where a lot of people historically agree this is where they went too far. Can we get on the same page?
The
Yeah.
insane thing is the match doesn't end with him
No,
going
Foley's
through
up.
the fucking top. Like, they keep fighting for another, 10 minutes.
Jim Ross is screaming, stop the damn match. So they wrestle, and Foley gets The Undertaker down, and then he gets the sack of thumbtacks.
And he's just, I love him. I love him with the thumbtacks. Like, he's like pulling them out little fistful by fistful at first, just like throwing them happily into the air before just dumping them all out. It's really
The
well done.
reaction,
This
the
was
reaction of the crowd when he takes the first handful and just sprinkles them on the ground is, even in his concussed, addled state, knowing, don't just throw the thumbtacks on the ground, show them the tacks first. And the crowd goes, and then he spreads them out and they go insane, which of course then ends really badly for him.
This was the introduction of thumbtacks to American pro wrestling.
Was
There
it?
had not been thumbtacks previously in American
No, there had
pro
been
wrestling.
thumbtacks in Japan.
There had been
Yes, in
there had
Japan.
actually not been thumbtacks in general in America before this. They were an unknown
they're-
concept.
Yeah,
Well,
people
yeah,
either would have
thumbtacks in
gotten-
general. Yeah.
Thumbtack technology was not widely available to Americans until
Wasn't
the
that weird in
1980s.
high school when we finally had this way to put things up on the bulletin board?
Yeah,
you can thank Mick Foley for that.
I'd just been using gum resin.
The best part about the thumbtacks thing is the match goes on for a little while. Eventually, he gets tombstoned and it ends. And he's stretchered out. I love, at one point, Terry Funk gets in there and gets beaten up by The Undertaker. Right, because they're trying to kill time for Foley to get back to his senses after going through the top of the cage. But when the match is over, he gets carted out, and Foley reportedly doesn't remember anything after going through the top of the cell.
He doesn't get carted out. They put him on a stretcher, and he's again, he says in his book, he asked, I think Terry Funk was around, he was like, was I already on a stretcher today? To which they said, yes. And he said, I don't want to be on a stretcher twice. So he gets up, and the crowd goes nuts. And with the help of the guys, he walks to the back. Reportedly, he asked somebody in the back if they used thumbtacks.
Right,
He
no,
was
yes,
covered in
Undertaker.
thumbtacks.
Yeah,
and
he said,
was covered in
Undertaker's
thumbtacks.
like, hey, Mick, are you okay? And he's like, Mark, did we use the thumbtacks? And Undertaker's like, yes, Mick. Yes, we did.
So yeah, he was injured. He was fucked up. He had deep bruises on his
He
back
had to have
and
been
stuff.
concussed.
But this is
Oh,
what
yeah,
he was
he was
concerned
concussed for
about,
sure.
was whether they actually used the thumbtacks.
How many
Multiple lacerations.
ballpark? How many concussions can you take in your life? I mean, I obviously know this is going to fluctuate from person to person, but do you have a number on that?
Well, apparently you're gonna have lasting damage after 3 or 4.
Okay.
So when Foley started getting into the research with the concussions, thanks to Christopher Nowinski and his foundation, he was learning about indications that you've had a concussion, including small ones, because he had only thought, okay, if I get real cloudy or whatever, that's probably a concussion. They're like, oh yeah, anytime you get hit in the head and you see a flash of light, that's a small concussion. And Foley is like, wait, every time you see a flash of light? Because I used to make sure in every one of my matches that I'd hit my head hard enough when we did that I'd see that.
No.
And they were like, yeah. And he got so used to it, it didn't even really like phase him for a while, you know. But right, people say like, you know, there's an argument like how much did we know back then about concussions, how much we didn't. Obviously, we knew it was a bad idea to get hit in the head a lot. But it is true that only over the last 10 years or so did we really get the specifics on a lot of it, the real specifics. And Foley didn't have that back then. It was like, oh, you had a concussion. That sucks. Shake it off, which was the accepted thing.
You know, we've talked about the Flairs being genetic super beings, but I feel like Mick Foley's kids must also be invincible.
Noelle had been training to be a wrestler, and I'm not sure if she still is, but last year she stopped for an extended period of time because she had concussion issues. But unlike, you know, Mick, she stopped, and they were taking care of it. Now, if she wants to come back, that's up to her. Along with learning the details, we've actually expanded treatment for concussions greatly. Look into, you know, the case of Daniel Bryan about like stuff like that. I'm not qualified to give the finer details of all of that, but I do know that in expanding the field, a lot of promising discoveries have been made to heal the human brain, which is an incredible organ.
You're trained in how to avoid giving people concussions, but you're not trained in diagnosing them or talking about them.
Yeah, the idea is don't get concussed.
Yeah. And I'm trained in how to not get them. I don't think in all of the time I have wrestled that I've gotten any, which is kind of remarkable because physically I'm a little awkward, and I have hit my head several times. But like I've never seen like flashes. I've never been really hazy. I've never like. I don't think I've had any concussions, and I consider that to be very lucky.
I don't have any that I know of.
Right, exactly.
You've been in at least one hardcore match where they threw a ladder at you, right?
I have. Yes. Madman Kareem locked eyes with me, and then he just chucked a ladder at me, and it was okay. It was okay.
That's a good
I was
segue
okay.
into. Well, but before we get into Evan, what did you think of this legendary match?
What did I?
Because it's very famous. It's a very
Did you
famous
enjoy
match.
it?
And it's famously not like a 5-star match, but man, is it notable.
What did I think of it? You know, the second he went off the top of the cage, it kind of felt like I don't know, like it didn't matter what I thought of the match or not. like
yeah, that's a lot of people's attitude.
It was like just too big of a thing to deal with. Where it's sort of like I could only compare it to, I don't know, like if there's like if you're watching a movie and there's a scene halfway through the movie that's just so shocking or so impressive or just like so momentous in comparison to the rest that like it's sort of like almost messes up the rest of the movie for you. I can't think of any examples of that, but that's sort of what it felt like.
I think that might be true for a lot of fans with wrestling in general. Like once they saw that happen, they were like, "Oh well, none of this is going to work for me anymore." Like that's
because
it.
all of this, like, it's the same kind of thing. Like whether it's in wrestling or whether it's in, like, you know, quote unquote more real violence like MMA or something like that. You know, we all know what the logical conclusion of all of this is. And the game is right. Just how do you get sort of as close to it as you can get without it being horrifying or without it being just untenable. You know what I mean? Like, because we all know it's just there's something in the human psyche that just like we want it to be humans versus humans to the death and or humans versus giant animals to the death. And even though none of us would actively want that.
Humans versus tigers to the death.
None of us would actively want that, but there is like some, you know, desire, and a lot of people would actively want that. I'm sure the CCW audience would. People, sure. At least some of them would have been down with it.
I'm sure they would. I like to compare hardcore wrestling to like extreme death metal or extreme metal.
Yeah,
where you know you can as the bands got faster and louder and more incoherent, you could tell like what the conclusion to all of that would be, but you could also tell that whatever the conclusion of it is, it's not going to be really good, like musically, you know. The Scum by Napalm Death is a very interesting record. I never want to hear it again. I think I listened to it once, and it's pretty much the logical conclusion of like the fastest and screamiest metal you could ever get, and it's not great. You know?
Evan, you and I
Oh,
saw
yeah.
Napalm Death once.
Man, I was not really familiar with Napalm Death's music, and I didn't know what to expect. I knew that they were like a legendary band, and I didn't know what to expect. And the two bands that opened for them, like that was one of the best shows I had ever seen in my life up until that point.
It was,
it was
ISIS and I Hate God, right?
Yes,
Not
yes,
that
the
ISIS.
the band that now in retrospect it is
Oh, thank you for
the
that
band that is
clarification. Doc.
now in retrospect it is quite unfortunate that they were named ISIS. They're a great fucking band though. And Soylent Green, yeah, and then I was like, oh, Napalm
Soylent
Death are
Green.
going to be really exciting, and yeah, it was like the worst thing I've ever seen in my life.
It was the worst show ever. And
Yeah.
we were still at the age where like we felt we had a responsibility to stay for the entire show.
Yes,
So we sat through their whole like hour and a half, 2 hour set, which might as well have been a 3-minute set in terms of the actual content.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Oh, it's like listening to somebody punch you in the face for an hour. It's like I get it, but I don't want to get it.
I do respect Napalm Death for being one of the only extreme metal bands with hardcore leftist politics. But I
that's
wish I enjoyed their music on any level. That just makes me sadder that I don't enjoy their music.
So somewhat the wrestling analog of Napalm Death, I would say, is this last match that we watched. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
for
I
a
had
little bit
trouble
of a
with this
segue,
one.
it's got Terry Funk. There was one other thing I wanted to mention about Terry Funk in the Hell in a Cell match. He gets choke slammed out of his shoes somehow. Undertaker choke slams him, and he rolls out of the ring, and you notice that he's barefoot, and his sneakers are just sitting there in the ring for the remainder
They
of the
look
match.
too big for
The
him.
power of the
I
Undertaker.
guess they
I
were
think that
too
was
big
it.
for him.
Yeah.
So this match is Terry Funk and Sabu at ECW Born to Be Wired. They did one of these no ropes barbed wire matches where the barbed wire is the ropes, and they just brought it as far as you could fucking bring it. And I mean, for me, this match has a kind of twisted elegance in its brutality to me. There's something beautiful to me about the end where they're so tangled up in the barbed wire together that all Sabu can do is kind of shift his weight on top of Terry Funk, and Terry Funk kicks out of the first pin attempt. And then
Yeah.
Sabu shifts his weight again on top to the point where neither of them can move without slashing major arteries. And that's the end. It's 1, 2, 3. Sabu wins. And then they literally have to
Wins
be
the ECW title, I might
the
add.
world title. Yes. The
Yeah, this was a
ECW
title
world
match, yes.
And then he doesn't look like much of a winner, having to be literally cut out of the barbed wire extremely carefully. So again, as not to cut any major arteries.
Yeah, I believe the way Doc put it is Sabu technically
Right.
won this match.
I compared them tangled in the barbed wire to like dogs that get stuck together, you know, when they're mating.
While doing what, Doc?
I'll say mating, I think is a fair way of putting it.
Banging.
Yeah, banging with their banging organs.
I've seen that happen.
Terry Funk said that when they were cutting him out of the barbed wire, like the real danger was that it got way too close to his eyes. But luckily, it didn't actually
Ugh.
gouge his eyes out. This was
Well, that's a
It really
horrible
is.
You
thought.
can
This
hear
match-
Sabu like screaming like, my eye, keep it away from my eye when they're cutting him out.
yeah,
Ah, my eyes! I'm not supposed to get barbed wire in it.
exactly.
A Lenny Leonard moment.
The older I get, the more I really try to not be as judgmental as I've been in my life. And when I look at people, all of the first impressions that I get, all of the things that I feel right away, like I really strive to try to remember that that's not necessarily accurate, and that it's based on a lot of biases that we bring to other people, and it's important to try to work through that. And that said, everybody I see who's like a hardcore ECW guy, for the most part, I look at them and I'm like, this is a bad person in their everyday life. This is a person who does bad things and the kinds of things bad people do in their spare time. These are
I
men
think
who've
Sabu's
stabbed
an
other
okay
men with
guy.
bottles.
I think Sabu's an okay guy. I don't know.
Sabu has definitely stabbed other men with bottles, I think,
Yeah.
in ECW.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
that-
not,
yeah,
not
yeah.
out of malice.
No. I meant like in his off time. Like,
Yeah. Oh, there's a famous match that we didn't watch that Sabu faced Cactus Jack, where they got a bottle out of the audience, and Jack is like, "Oh, just break it over my head," because that's what happens. So Sabu swings the glass bottle at his head, and it goes thunk, and it doesn't break, and which looks like it hurt a lot. To which Foley's, what do you think Foley's response is? Oh, well, just hit me again. So he hit him several times in the head with the bottle until it finally broke. Because bottles don't break like that. Not like in the movies. That's sugar glass. It's gimmicked, brother,
Oh man.
I had a tough time watching this match, too, just because of all the violence.
I did, yeah.
You think that it takes a especially awful kind of person to decide to wrap his opponent in barbed wire? Actually, RVD did that.
RVD
and my
did
thought
that.
was, my thought was, oh yeah, RVD has a lot of expertise at rolling things up.
I don't think
So he kind of rolled him like
I-
a blunt. So then taking your opponent who is rolled up in barbed wire, placing him on a table, wrapping yourself in barbed wire, and then leaping onto said opponent through the table so that you are all inextricably bound in the barbed wire together.
All right.
Does that take especially twisted?
I guess let me clarify. I don't think that being in ECW and doing, or I don't think that doing this kind of wrestling makes you an inherently bad person. That's very glib. But I do think that probably the kinds of internal drives that lead somebody to wrap themselves in barbed wire and then hurl themselves onto another person that they have also wrapped in barbed wire and and ram that person through a table lead to everyday habits and conduct in your interpersonal relationships in which you are probably functionally not a great person.
Well, this is where the real interest. This is what's so interesting about Foley.
Yeah, except Mick Foley, because Mick Foley does seem like an amazing
by
human
all
being.
reports. Yeah, he seems like he's an intelligent guy. He seems like a really nice guy, a great family man.
Yeah.
His kids love him. His wife
he's
loves
very
him.
progressive,
He seems like a gentle, sweet dude. And yet he did the most hardcore of any of this shit, of any of them. So I don't know, man. I don't know exactly what the relationship is here.
Terry Funk looks like a guy who gets drunk and fights people who don't want to be fighting him.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
kind of the idea.
I was saying when we
I
were
don't
watching
know.
this match that like Terry Funk as the character looks like the old guy at the bar waiting for somebody to kill him in hand-to-hand combat
Yes.
because he fights everybody at the bar and he's disappointed that in his mid-50s nobody has been able to do it yet.
I don't see him fighting anybody who doesn't want to fight, though.
No, but a lot of people
I don't
wanna
see
fight.
him as a
He's not an instigator,
as a
but he's
malicious
available.
person at all.
He's available for fighting.
Exactly.
Now, some of them, yeah. I mean, Sandman. Okay,
Sandman's
he
another
might
story.
be,
Fuck the Sandman.
and he might not be a great guy, but
No, I get
I haven't heard too much bad shit said about
no, and
most of the ECW
and
guys.
I am.
Tommy Dreamer seems like
Yeah,
a sweetheart.
man. I mean, I guess I'm being real judgy. Okay, we just reset the Zoom meeting. So even though no time passed for you, like 3 minutes have passed for us, and in that time, I've reflected on. I am being very judgy here.
Yes.
I'm sounding judgy. I guess there's two things happening. One is that I do feel like the character of a lot of ECW guys is like kind of a, I don't know, like
the general ethics of the ECW world was not something that I would subscribe to.
That's a good
No,
one.
it was definitely a coke party.
Oh, coke, meth, crack, like, yeah.
Whatever drug you were into, somebody
Whatever
had.
drugs New Jack had on him at the time. Yes.
Exactly.
And here's one of the funny things about it is they had Joey Styles on commentary professing some kind of traditional values, saying that it was terrible that the Sandman beats his wife, or that it was terrible that this or that bad thing was happening, which was not necessarily the sentiment being expressed by the audience. It was often quite in contrast to the audience. I'd say that if there's anyone who we can make any kind of negative moral judgment about, it's by and large the ECW crowd.
Yeah.
Well, no, and I think that I think I'm also I feel like I'm associating a lot of what I see in ECW with, like, I don't know, creepy dudes I knew in high school who liked watching, I don't know, videos of people doing actual violence to each other on the internet, like that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like I think that aesthetic is sort of wrapping itself up, because I have to, especially if I'm interested in.
I get where you can associate that. I get where the association's coming from, the similarities.
In the name of open-mindedness and intellectual and philosophical consistency, I have to admit that if you're somebody who's doing this as a performance art, I mean, I have to respect that. These guys are clearly incredibly dedicated to what they do, and if I don't understand it, maybe that's my problem.
And within the context of wrestling too, like, I mean, Sabu and Terry Funk had been feuding since the very beginning of Paul Heyman taking over ECW in '94. So it's the most hardcore promotion known for its violence. You have the two top guys in that promotion who have been feuding and escalating the level of violence for 3 years now. And this was sort of the logical conclusion of all of that. Now, and from that standpoint, because, and part of why I say that is I do think that there are some hardcore wrestling fans who are like the people you were describing, Evan, who do really enjoy seeing people in pain. And they're the ones who are, tend to be into CZW and whatever else. And they've sort of splintered off from the mainstream wrestling fan in the last couple of decades. But then there is the wrestling fan who does not specifically like that sort of thing, but enjoys seeing it to the extent that it makes sense as a logical escalation of a hateful, violent wrestling feud. And, and I don't know if it's just a matter of degree, if it's like all of us have some of that sadism in us to some degree, and some people more than others, or it's just, it just is an outcrop of one's other aesthetic sensibilities in that case.
A place where that made sense for me was like in the Kenny Omega hardcore match we watched, where that was something where, because I guess it also sort of existed in this, I guess that match existed in sort of a cartoony world. In something like ECW, yeah. there is something that's almost voyeuristic about this match. Like, it is almost like, you're watching. It's as if you stumbled into an illegal underground fight club that is that isn't wrestling. It's like, human dog fighting or something. And I guess
but at the same time, you have them, like after Sabu jumps through the table wrapped in barbed wire onto Terry Funk, who's also wrapped in barbed wire.
It's hard to say fast.
Yeah. You have this incredibly wrestling thing of the two of them very carefully dragging their barbed wire entwined bodies into the ring so they can finish the match without actually killing themselves or the other person. So that tiny bit of restraint, that pulling back from the absolute line and doing this thing that, like, for a second looks really contrived, of them like really carefully getting in the ring to finish the match. There's something like just amazingly, like, I don't know, ironic or weirdly incoherent and or weirdly contradictory that to me is beautiful in a way.
You could say that's a metaphor for a certain kind of love.
Yeah. And I think that's how they feel about it.
It is. That,
You
that
know?
can be the scary part, is that it absolutely is. The respect these hardcore guys have for each other. Because in wrestling, in general, what you're doing is you're giving your body to your opponent and saying, here, do with this what you're going to do with it. Please give it back to me at the end of the day in one piece. And so the hardcore guys let their partner do to their bodies way more, in way more extreme ways.
And that image of Sabu and Terry Funk completely entwined in this barbed wire nest, like
dogs.
It's totally beautiful. They're like, they've taken it to this extreme, to the ends of their lives almost. They've taken it as far as they possibly can, and now they are inextricably bundled together in gore and violence.
Poetic.
And those two guys love each other, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, they have to.
Terry Funk could have stopped at any point.
Yeah, there's no way.
And he didn't. By now, he mostly did. I think the last time he did anything in wrestling was about 2 years ago.
By the way, I got to comment on how perfect Sabu's pants are for this match.
Yeah.
He has these, like, parachute-y, like, shiny genie pants or whatever. And they just get all caught and ripped up in various ways on the barbed wire. You see him, like, really trying to get his junk out of the way a couple of times so it doesn't
Dick
get ripped
flopping
up.
around in his genie pants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the dick.
He really does look like a Street Fighter character.
He does,
really
yes.
does. That's definitely the inspiration for it, or an inspiration for it. When he first trained, like, he didn't do any interviews until, like, the mid-2000s. When he finally did and talked about his training, he trained under his uncle, who had wrestled for decades. And his uncle didn't train him to do hardcore at first at all. His uncle trained him how to do mat wrestling. He's like, we didn't hit the ropes for, like, 2 years. So he knew how to do all of that, and then crafted a character around his base, which is why Sabu is Sabu, and a lot of people who are kind of like Sabu weren't. But yeah,
he had this incredible mystique. Like, no matter what I knew about wrestling, I believed this guy was totally psychotic.
Yeah.
And because part of it had to be true. Right?
Right,
Like,
and just to do this kind of stuff with his body. Just incredible.
This might have actually been the first ever actual ECW match I ever watched.
Really?
I'm
Because
sorry.
ECW wasn't really readily available. We couldn't, we didn't have the internet to watch it. I read about it in magazines.
Oh,
So when I finally got to watch this match, I was like, oh, fuck, it is really that hardcore.
I
shit.
started actually watching ECW on a weekly basis when I could around, I want to say, early 98. And I had met DVS, our friend the rapper, who we still need to get on this show sometime.
Yes.
in high school. And he told me, and I'd heard about ECW through the magazines, and he's like, okay, so what you have to do is you have to watch this UHF channel at like 2 a.m. on Saturdays. And I wasn't staying up that late at that point, so I'd set my VCR, and sure enough, most of the time, ECW was in that time slot. Occasionally, it was just an infomercial, because it was infomercial time. But that's when it was on in the New York market, on like 2 a.m. on a public station in New York. It had a slightly better time slot in Philly, I think.
Occasionally you get episodes of Candle Cove.
I got to see some of the ECW roster because they invaded Raw one week in 97.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That was really cool. Yeah, you had the Sandman out there smoking an entire cigarette, drinking a beer, smashing it over his head on fucking Monday Night Raw, which was still not yet like really fully in the Attitude Era.
Oh, no, well before that. Still very cartoony.
Which was a point I wanted to make about the first Hell in a Cell match. That's an in-your-house pay-per-view. They still have the hokey in-your-house branding at that point. They hadn't fully shed all that stuff, when they're introducing the most brutal match at
Do
the
we have
time.
some final thoughts wrapping this up?
Well, I gotta say that I definitely liked this kind of wrestling a lot better when I was younger. I still absolutely love Mick Foley, but the really hardcore stuff, like, more power to you if you like it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, because that gets to be a touchy subject, but it's really not my thing. I like the occasional hardcore, but it's not really my thing.
it can be done well. It doesn't always speak to me, but I do enjoy like an occasional like well done hardcore match. Man, I just feel like Sabu Funk though didn't qualify as well done. It's just
Yeah,
kind of
like,
gross.
I totally get all the poetic stuff you say about it, Ben, but that doesn't mean that I really enjoyed it.
No. I did not really enjoy watching most of it, especially when they get like the close-ups of Sabu spiking him in the head with the
Yeah.
piece of barbed
I don't
wire.
need to see that. That's the kind of thing that, like,
No.
I don't know. As much as I don't like quoting Jim Cornette, he's put it well once. He said, "Yeah, I'll watch the video of the woman getting hit by the train once, but I don't want to see it again once I've seen it. And I certainly don't want to see it every day as the basis of my entertainment. And if you do, maybe examine what's wrong with you." Then, like,
Yeah.
that's a cohesive,
No,
that's a coherent
sure.
way of saying that.
For sure. I'm glad that match happened.
Right.
I think it sort of had to happen, and I'm glad that I've seen it. But yeah, I don't need to be seeing that as I don't need to be consuming a diet of those kinds of images.
well put.
That's for sure.
All right, oh boy,
But-
where are we going?
For our fans who haven't had enough of us talking about
Ah.
hardcore,
Oh boy.
and
yes.
who want to subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/contesting wrestling, we have a premium episode exclusive to our $5 tier subscribers every single week. And this week, we'll be getting into some more contemporary hardcore to see where this particular genre of pro wrestling has been taken since the late 90s. And this is definitely going to go too far.
Oh, yeah.
I am not looking forward to it.
This has been Contesting Wrestling.
Follow us on Twitter @ContestingW. We love you,
Butts.
but
Stay out of the
Bye,
ocean.
everybody.
And stay, even if you have an ocean in
Stay
your
home.
home, stay out of that.
Unless you know you're a fish.
stay home and out of the ocean, comma, but.